Welcome. Thanks for being here. Between March 2020 and the summer of 21, I bought no perfume in a store. I bought instead comfort in samples, in travel-size bottles from companies I hadn't heard of in 2019. I didn't know at the time that I was being reorganized. What COVID did to Perfume is the largest unnamed restructuring of the fragrance industry in a century, and it happened in 24 months. It happened across 5 simultaneous lenses: psychological, social, economic, political, and cultural. The fragrance marketing departments were reacting, not causing, and we've been living inside the consequences for 6 years without naming the cause in olfactory terms. This is the decade that smelled like loss, and every bottle on your dresser bought after March 2020 was shaped by all 5 forces at once. These bottles are evidence of grief through the vehicle of commerce. While I'm the right narrator for this decade, you should know that I'm also the unreliable one. I watched my own consumption patterns shift in real terms, or should I say in real time, without recognizing what was shifting in them. I bought bottles I would not have bought in 2019, and I stopped buying bottles I'd been buying religiously since 1998. I let influences I'd never heard of shape my discovery in a way that 12 months earlier I would have found undignified. Everyone watching this did some version of the same thing. The question is not whether your consumption shifted. It did. The question is which one of the 5 forces was doing the shifting when, and how the forces interacted to produce the bottle on your dresser in May 2026. Conventional fragrance criticism reads the post-pandemic landscape as a marketing story. New influences, new categories, new launches. That reading is inadequate. The fragrance marketing story sits on top of a psychological, social, economic, political, and cultural reorganization that the marketing departments themselves were reacting to. Fragrance marketing didn't cause the reorganization. The reorganization caused the marketing. And the 5 forces were grounded in grief. And grief was distributed unevenly. The bottles you and I now wear are evidence of how the grief was distributed. And so this episode is about the decade that smelled like loss. By February 2020, I could feel that the dam had already cracked. 11 years of bull market had stretched every valuation past the point of repair, and the retail apocalypse was eating Sears and JCPenney in real time. I'd been reading about the loneliness epidemic in clinical literature for 2 years, and the political tribes that would make the COVID response brutally polarized were already sorted along lines a virus could only inherit, not create. The fragrance counter I'd been buying from for 30 years was losing its discovery monopoly to a video app I hadn't yet opened. The bottles that would define the next 5 years were either insider rumors I'd never heard of or like Baccarat Rouge 540, body care brands I'd bought without noticing they were the most important fragrance brands of the coming decade, like the entire Sol de Janeiro line. Glossier You was the it bottle. TikTok fragrance didn't exist as a category, but everything was leaning. And the pandemic arrived and pushed. It began with anosmia. Mass anosmia gave the public what no health crisis in the post-war era had ever given it: a felt experience of olfactory loss. Smell is the sense we take for granted until it disappears, and what disappears with it is so much more than perfume. The taste of food disappears, and the recognition of intimate bodies disappears. The smell-mediated memory system, which is the deepest and oldest memory system in the human brain, disconnects from its triggers. And people who lost their sense of smell during COVID reported in clinical literature and personal essays a specific kind of grief: the grief of being unable to access their own past. Parosmia made it worse because the follow-up phase, where smell partially returned wrong. Coffee smelled like sewage. Roses smelled like burning hair. And their own skin smelled like aluminium or rotten meat. The olfactory hallucination didn't have a public vocabulary, and the people experiencing it felt insane, in addition to feeling sick. I didn't lose my sense of smell, but plenty of people I knew did, and the ones who recovered fully became evangelists. The ones who recovered partially, patients. The ones who didn't recover stopped buying perfume entirely. The psychological response of the wider population, including those who didn't personally lose their sense of smell, was regression. Regression to the olfactory vocabulary of childhood safety, of warm rooms, of public spaces remembered, of relationships missed. Every dominant note of the 2020 to 2022 fragrance market smelled like food or infants, or the bodies of people you loved, or the rooms you'd been told you could no longer enter. Let me show you the evidence. The bottles on my tray. Each one is a different shape of grief. Maison Maggiella Replica by the Fireplace is the bookstore of the mind, composed by Marie Saleman in 2015. On my skin, it smells like cloves and pink pepper, opening into chestnut and gaiac wood with vanilla, Peru balsam, and cashmeran in the base. By 2020, it was in every comfort fragrance list in every magazine that hadn't yet shut down for lockdown. It doesn't smell like a literal fire. It smells like the room you'd be sitting in if the fire had been built by someone else hours ago and you'd walked in carrying a book you intended to read all evening. The room exists nowhere in physical space. The bottle constructs it on your wrist. You know, I wore my first bottle in the early months, and the bookstore of the mind is the room the bottle builds for the woman who has run out of rooms. Le Labo Santal 33, created by Frank Vuckel, is the elegy. On me, It smells like, let me spray it on the skin. It smells like sandalwood, cardamom, iris, leather, violet, papyrus, Virginia cedar, amber. It was the bottle of the subway car and the coffee shop where everyone you didn't know wore the same fragrance, and the air carried the chord of all of you mixed together. Niche cult for nearly a decade. Mass saturation happened from 2020 through 2023 because the millennials, it had been the secret of, finally had the money. Santal 33 is what the pre-pandemic city smelled like when 1,000 strangers' bodies could occupy the same train car, and the train car carried the persistent sandalwood cardamom signature of the urban professional class. The pre-pandemic city doesn't exist anymore. The bottle remains in the market. Le Labo Santal 33 is the 2026 bottle that is the elegy for the olfactory commons that the pandemic dissolved. Fleur Missing Person, composed by Constance Georges Picot and launched in 2020, is the bottle that named the feeling. The composition is a white floral spine with jasmine, neroli, orange blossom over a base of white musk and Australian sandalwood. The bottle's most consequential single sentence, "It smells like a person you love and miss," was not Fleur's marketing copy. It actually came from a TikTok review by content creator Rachel Rigler. Rigler's review drove the bottle out of stock in 5 hours and built a 200K person waitlist. Fleur's marketing department wasn't the author of the line that sold the bottle. The customer was. The bottle was the first TikTok native viral fragrance designed for the channel and not adopted by it. The pandemic made all of us missing persons in some direction. We missed people. We missed the people we'd been before, the people we are now. The brand named the bottle, and the influencer named the feeling. The fragrance economy is now what happens in the gap between those two namings. Kayali Love Fest Burning Cherry 48 is the receipt for the cherry economy. You know, the economy was built in 2018 by Tom Ford Lost Cherry. It was composed by Turner at Givaudan. Lost Cherry hit cultural saturation between 2021 and 2023, and every house chased it. And the cherry vanilla tonka record that became a category didn't exist before 2018. Kayali, composed by Gabriella Cilario and Philip Courtier in 2022, built the mass market. It built the democratized version. I bought it because Lost Cherry was sold out for 18 months, and I, like everyone else, had been trained to want cherry. Kayali calculated correctly that the trained want would survive the price compression. The category creation moment was Turner's Lost Cherry. The economy was built on cherry. This bottle is the receipt. Maison Francis Coeur de Jean Baccarat Rouge 540 is the bottle TikTok built. Francis Coeur de Jean composed it in 2014 as a limited edition crystal bottle commission for Baccarat's 250th anniversary. Broader commercial release followed in 2015. On me, saffron and jasmine in the opening, amberwood, ambergris, hedione in the heart, fir resin, cedar, sugar, ambroxan, oak moss in the base. You know, the molecules that do the cult radiating glow effect, amberwood and hedione and ambroxan, were what made the bottle famous before TikTok confirmed the fame. For 7 years, it lived as a fashion insider niche. Then between 2021 and 2022, the algorithm decided. And by the end of 2022, it was the most talked about bottle on the planet. Faked at scale by clone houses on Amazon. Referenced in pop music. Photographed in Architectural Digest, dressing rooms. The bottle hit cultural saturation through a Discovery Channel that hadn't existed when the bottle launched. And I bought it because the algorithm had told enough people about it that not owning it had begun to feel like a position. The fragrance counter didn't give me Baccarat Rouge. A 30-second video did. Soldier de Janeiro Cheirosa 62, launched in 2020, is the bottle my daughter Ella wore through the entire pandemic. It has a pistachio and almond opening into jasmine petals and heliotrope with vanilla, salted caramel and sandalwood in the base. The bottle that the body care brand discovered itself a fragrance brand through. The bottle that hit cultural saturation as the lockdown mist, the cheap, edible, sweet, vacation-coded body spray that millions of women bought during 2020 and 2021 because the brand had calculated correctly that a salted caramel beach holiday in a $28 bottle was a survival good in a year when the actual bottle, or should I say the actual beach holiday, was illegal. I knew this bottle in the most intimate way. A fragrance critic can know a bottle she does not own, because I smelled it on Ella every day through the years she was at home. I never bought it for myself. I bought it this week in 2026, 6 years after it walked into my house on my own daughter's wrists. The pandemic offered me a salted caramel beach mist in 2020 through the body of my own child, and I didn't buy it for myself until now. That is also the data. What these 6 bottles share is grief, distributed across 6 different shapes. The bookstore of the mind, the elegy for the public commons, the named relational feeling, the trained consumer's cherry receipt, the algorithm's chosen status object. Regression is rational when the world has become unrecognizable, and the world is still unrecognizable. And the bottles are not the only place we wore the unrecognition. The social function of fragrance was inverted twice within 30 months, and the second inversion landed differently on every generation alive at the moment of reemergence. The first inversion was privatization. Masks removed the cloud's audience overnight. The public air vacancy filled with the ethanol smell of hand sanitizer, and fragrance went interior. I was my own and only audience now. What I reached for was a skin scent or a comfort gourmand, because no other olfactory behavior was decent for a woman who knew nobody was downwind from her. Late in 2021, the dam reversed, and Sillage came back, and it came back changed. The cloud was no longer promiscuous. The cloud was scarce and declarative, and every projection of fragrance into shared air now carried the message: I've survived. I'm here. I've re-entered the public body, and I am declaring it. The loud return then manifested by generation in 4 distinct languages. The Gen Z language was smell maxing, and I've watched it play out from the outside the platform built it. The young men were stacking MFK Baccarat Rouge 540 over Tom Ford Private Blend over Dior Sauvage Elixir, layering for compound sillage that announced their presence 3 subway cars away. The young women were on the other pole, wearing Fleur Missing Person and Glossier You as close-to-skin invitations rather than declarations. The bifurcation this episode names lives, fully formed inside this one cohort. The millennial language was investment piece. I've watched the woman a decade younger than me come back into public life wearing Le Labo Santal 33, the way the woman a decade older than me had once come back wearing Joy by Perfume. The bottle was the announcement of having survived a thing. Santal 33 saturated 2020 through 2023 on the treat yourself recovery wave. You know, Frederick Malle, Portrait of a Lady, carried the grown-up tier. Byredo, Boulder Freak, carried the quiet luxury tier. And Puig saw what was happening and bought Byredo in May 2022 for about $1 billion, the largest niche fragrance acquisition of the post-pandemic era. Puig's portfolio now reads as the single concentrated bet on the millennial cohort. Paco Rabanne, Carolina Herrera, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Penhaglians, L'artisan, Charlotte Tilbury, now Byredo. The Gen X language, which is mine, was heritage reclamation. The bottles that returned to my dresser and to the dresses of every woman I know in this cohort between 2021 and 2024 were the bottles of our youth: Knowing, Poison, Amarige, Organza, Shalimar. The pandemic stress made the bottles of my college years suddenly legible again as objects of refuge. The market signal coming out of Gen X was a single sentence, and it was the same sentence in every collection. I want to smell like the woman I was before all of this was on my shoulders. The boomer language was the quietest of the 4. The woman I know in this cohort barely participated in the loud return at all. They reached instead for their own classics, bought again or worn again as memory anchors. Joy, Arpège, Chanel No. 5, treated less as fragrance and more like a ritual. The signal was the inverse of the Gen Z young man's. It wasn't I survived and I declare it. It was I'm still here and I smell like myself again. The economics of the moment tell the same story as my trade does. In the first half of 2020, LVMH's perfumes and cosmetics division lost roughly 29% of its revenue year over year. Estee Lauder's prestige fragrance segment took comparable hits. Department store closures removed approximately 15 months of the historical discovery infrastructure, and what filled the vacancy was a wave of direct-to-consumer brands operating on margins the oligopoly had never had to compete with. Fleur relaunched digital first in 2021. Sniff Dead Cool, Skylar, and Henry Rose accelerated alongside it. Sol de Janeiro, which had been a body care brand in 2019, making a coconut cream nobody yet told was a fragrance, generated some 158 million euros in revenue in the first 9 months of fiscal 22-23 and became the second largest brand in L'Occitane's entire portfolio. The Chirosa 62 my daughter wore for 6 years before I bought it for myself is one bottle in that market share transfer. The recovery, when it came, was K-shaped. The upper line of the K, right, ran into niche luxury at $300 a bottle and above, and it ran fast. Baccarat Rouge 540 became the most talked about fragrance on the planet in 2022. Tom Ford Beauty posted record growth across 2022 to 24, and Estee Lauder paid $2.8 billion for the brand in November 2022, largely on the basis of the fragrance segment's projected $1 billion trajectory. The wealthy survivors of the pandemic took the money they were not spending on travel and on live events and they put it on their wrists. The lower line of the K ran into affordable comfort at $30 a bottle and moved into the L'Occitane portfolio volume. Bath and Body Works posted record fragrance growth alongside Sol de Janeiro. Maison Margiela Replica, retailing in the $90 to $170 range, depending on size, became the gateway luxury for the generation that couldn't afford Tom Ford. Between the two lines of the K, the middle hollowed. The Calvin Kleins, the Marc Jacobs, the Burberrys of the $70 to $90 designer bracket, they just weren't the bottles people bought between 2020 and 2024. They were the bottles people walked past on the way to one of the two ends. Underneath everything, the supply chain was under quiet stress. The 2020 grass jasmine harvest was delayed by lockdown, labor disruption. Geopolitical events through 2022 disrupted ingredient supply chains across multiple continents, and some of the bottles you bought at this time didn't smell exactly as they did before, and the brands didn't announce the reformulations. The changes were attributed at all, to vague supply chain considerations. The fragrance counter is now split, and the split maps onto post-pandemic income distribution with disturbing precision. The $30 bottle is selling. The $300 bottle is selling. But the $80 bottle is on clearance. I am about to break the channel rule about not being news reactive. The rule wink, the one allowed per script, lives here. The political lens can't be applied without naming the political moment. COVID polarized the public health response to a degree matched in modern memory only by the HIV/AIDS political moment of the 80s. Masks and vaccines became identity markers. Anosmia itself was politicized in the way every COVID symptom was politicized, dismissed by some constituencies as hoax framing and leveraged by others as proof of viral severity. The same olfactory symptom carried opposite political valences, depending on the political tribe of the reporter, which is a strange thing for a sense organ to be doing. the politicization seeped sideways into fragrance through the wellness fragrance category. Clean fragrance, a marketing label growing since the mid-2010s, had sounded neutrally health conscious in 2019. By 2022, fragrance-free, non-toxic, EWG verified read as politically coded inside the larger wellness politics culture war, without the industry having ever chosen the alignment. Henry Rose Queens and Monsters is the bottle that explains the category to me on my skin. Michelle Pfeiffer launched Henry Rose in 2019 with full ingredient disclosure, EWG verification, and cradle-to-cradle gold certification. The only fine fragrance brand to date holding both. Pascal Gorin composed Queens and Monsters from a palette of approximately 300 ingredients, down from the conventional perfumer's 3,000 to meet the jewel bar. The specificity is what makes this bottle a structural object rather than a marketing object. The name knows what it's doing. Queens and Monsters is the brand admitting that what we wanted post-pandemic was a bottle that signaled both safety and complication. Safe to put on the body, not safe in the sense of inert. Pfeiffer's brand existed before COVID, but COVID gave the brand its market. Underneath the wellness shift, the 2022 invasions and sanctions cycles were quietly reshaping the supply chain. Synthetic substitutes altered the composition of legacy fragrances, and the reformulations were attributed at all to supply chain issues rather than the geopolitical events they were. Below all of that, brands launched bottles claiming neurological or affective outcomes during a period of generalized distrust of institutional medicine. Fragrance as a deregulated cosmetic-making quasi-medical mood claims became a hospitable channel for that distrust. I'm not flattering the industry by naming any of this. The industry profited from polarization, geopolitical disruption, and regulatory distrust. The bottle on your dresser and on my tray is partly evidence of those points and the profits. The cultural lens is where I land the synthesis. You know, the 4 prior lenses each produced a discrete restructuring. The cultural lens names what they built, and what they built is the split. Clean girl skin sense on one pole and loud luxury niche on the other. And the split is now the dominant cultural fact of post-pandemic fragrance. And it sorts by income, because the K-shaped recovery showed up at the fragrance counter. It sorts by generation, because each cohort occupies the 2 poles differently. It sorts by political identity, because the clean girl aesthetic maps loosely onto wellness politics, culture, and the loud luxury aesthetic maps loosely onto status display culture. It sorts by gender, because the bilateral male fragrance economy that TikTok smell maxing built is a parallel infrastructure rather than an integrated one. The cultural argument this episode has been making in pieces is this: The split isn't a phase. The split is not a marketing trend that will pass. The split is the ground we now live on. Every bottle on every dresser is on one side of it or the other. And the bottle on yours is the evidence of which side you woke up on this morning. 5 forces. Psychological regression sold back at $28 and $300. The social republication on the sillage flag. The economic split hollowing out the middle. Political polarization merging fragrance with wellness and war. Cultural sorting into the split counter we now live on. The pandemic isn't over for me. I bought Sol de Janeiro Cheirosa 62 this week. It's on my tray. It will smell faithfully like a beach holiday I couldn't take in 2020. And like my daughter Ella, in every room of my house, through the years, she was at home. I will wear it, and I will think about why.